Please welcome to the stage, Harriet Happel.
Well, hello. Did everybody enjoy their lunch? Yeah? All right. Well, you're in for a real treat this afternoon. So I have a question to ask you. What do you get when you have an AI evangelist, a futurist, 2 industry senior VPs, 1 community college faculty member, and 1 executive director of digital readiness all in the same room? Amy Kaufman. Yes, absolutely. So we are welcoming Amy and her group for a great plenary session. So join me in welcoming Amy Kaufman, Senior Vice President for the CEO Leadership Alliance, who will get things started. Amy, are you on?
I am here. How are you,
Hello,
Harriet?
friend.
It's so good to see you. Hello, my friend. Last time I saw you was at CCC AOE in Rancho Mirage. And so here we are
Absolutely.
together again. Yeah, it's good to
Well,
be
take it
be
off.
here. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. So glad to be here with you today. We're coming to you from all over the globe. I'm here right now in Manhattan at 54th and Broadway. We have our 2 other virtual panelists joining us from Vancouver and then also from San Francisco. And then of course on our stage, we have our colleagues that are here from Southern California. So it's going to be a great time together. I'm going to kick us off virtually with a couple of things. The first thing I want to do as our colleagues are coming up on the stage is we're going to do a little walk through history together and kind of see how did we even get here? I mean, what does it mean to be prepared for an AI and AI-infused workforce? So as you can see, our colleagues are here on the stage with us. So joining us on stage is Jasmine Pachnanda, our Senior Vice President for CLAOC. We also have Douglas Redmond from College of the Desert. Hey there. And then Jerry Hartanto from Data IQ. And then of course, our colleagues that are here with us virtually, Brian Gonzalez, Executive Director from Intel for Digital Readiness, and then Stephen Ibaraki, who is quite a wonderful man, and I can't wait for you to be able to learn more about him as I interview him. What I want to start by doing is really grounding us in why we're here right now at this moment in time. We've really all come to recognize that there's going to be a demand for AI skills that is going to only grow exponentially. And that's really going to drive a need for our workforce to be prepared. We're also going to be looking at developing that AI workforce in order to remain both globally competitive and competitive in our own regions. And then ultimately that democratization of AI skills, that those strengths, those knowledge, those skills, those abilities, having those opportunities democratized is going to help us build a diverse and inclusive talent pipeline. So here we are at this magical intersect, between the present, the future, and the past. And we're all right here at this moment in time. But how did we really get here? What if I told you it all came down to these 3 items? 100 rotating drums, 10 miles of wire, and 1 million soldered connections. And you'd be saying, what are you talking about? How does that have anything to do with artificial intelligence? Well, we remember that the Enigma machine in World War II, used by the Germans, how were we able to break those codes? Well, of course, we were able to do that because of Alan Turing and his machine intelligence test. You probably remember the movie that was called The Imitation Game. Remember that? It's a fabulous movie. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, go and do so. But really, this is what the original machine looked like. It wasn't just Alan Turing, though. It was also a British mathematician, Gordon Welchman, and it was called the Bombay machine. And they were able to use this to crack the code of the Enigma machine. But we have to give credit to our friends who were the cryptologists in Poland, because they were really the originators of this device, and they were breaking codes even a few years earlier. But here again, this movie, we were able to see, how it all went down and what really happened. It was actually based on a paper that Alan Turing had written, where he wanted to describe what would it actually look like if a computer could think. And so that's what the movie's based on. You might remember in the movie, they changed the name of the machine from Bombay Machine to Christopher. I don't know the story behind that, but it's kind of an interesting little fun fact for you. But as we continue to progress through this time machine and this timeline, there's actually a father of AI, John McCarthy. He was the first to coin that actual term. And we move on through the 60s, of course, the first chatbot, right? We use chatbots all the time now. They started as early as 1964. But then in 1969, there was a huge breakthrough. And there was the very, very first general purpose mobile robot, and his name was Shaky. Let's learn a little bit about Shaky.
Shaky was the world's first mobile intelligent robot, embodying numerous breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, robotics, computer vision, navigation, and other research areas. The robot was developed from 1966 to 1972 by SRI International, then called Stanford Research Institute, and its legacy and impact are still very much alive today.
Shaky's really the great-grandfather of things like self-driving cars and even military drones.
The hardware was really pretty primitive, but the software architecture and the software algorithms are what changed the world.
I think we all thought we were doing really interesting stuff, so it didn't really dawn on us that we were doing anything special.
Shaky established a position about what we should be thinking about as possible, as feasible.
To understand why Shaky is so important, we have to go back to 1966, and we have to understand where AI research was at that time.
Well, you have to remember that it was pretty much of a greenfield when Shaky started. All over the country and even outside of the United States, people were beginning to build the components to artificial intelligence. Nobody had tried at the time that Shaky was launched to integrate all the components of AI and robotics into a single moving vehicle that could reason about the world, could sense the world around it, and could take actions.
Prior to 1966, there were no robots, or at least not intelligent ones. The concept of an intelligent robot was limited to the realm of fiction.
You will meet a charming character in The Robot, always at your service.
When you read the title of the original proposal, it was something like a mobile automaton for reconnaissance. And the reason we called it an automaton was because until Shaky, you couldn't go into a funding agency and say, I want money to make a science fiction kind of device. And so we needed a name. And finally, Charlie, in his inimitable fashion, said, it shakes like hell when it moves. Let's just call it Shaky.
Shaky also inspired research in natural language-based interactions, leading to the popular speech-based technologies that we use today. Shaky's breakthrough in computer vision is now used to help drivers stay in their lanes. And every time you get driving directions on your phone or a navigation system, you are benefiting from the A-star navigation algorithm, first invented for Shaky. Even NASA's Mars exploration rovers use navigational techniques that were first launched with Shaky.
The future is things like potentially having teams of autonomous aircraft that could go out, for example, and do firefighting, and doing this either fully autonomously or potentially in tandem with human-piloted aircraft that can go out and work with them collaboratively.
Shaky now resides in the Computer History Museum, visible to hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. And in 2017, Shaky was honored with an IEEE Milestone Achievement Award.
The Shaky milestone is important because, first of all, Shaky is the world's first mobile intelligent robot. In addition, this is the first IEEE milestone in the areas of either robotics or artificial intelligence.
Looking back, more than 50 years after the Shaky project began, it's inspiring to see how one small team can make such an impact. How one ambitious idea continues to benefit our lives. How one robot changed the world.
We didn't realize, I think, any of us, what the significance of this was. We knew we were the first, but nobody knew where it was going, and I don't think any of us would have predicted what happened.
Shaky planted the flag way out there. It's a model of the kind of ambitious projects that we should be looking at in the future.
Pretty fascinating.
Shaky was the world's first.
And so when you think about the work that we get to do together, I had to smile inside because there's so many of us that are just going about our work, working together across our regions, across the state, and we might not think what we're doing has an impact or is any big deal. We're going to look back together at this time and say, you know, we were the first to really start to do this together to build this talent pipeline for our entire state. So let's talk a little bit more. I mean, look, the 90s come, 1997. You have to remember, and many of you do, that this was the first time that a computer played chess and actually beat the chess champion, Garry Kasparov. Of course, there was a robot equipped with emotions, and really, truly, wouldn't you say the crowning glory is the Roomba with the highly efficient AI-powered vacuum cleaner? But let's go back in time. Let's take a look at what happened on that day in 1997.
The bishop can easily fall victim to what we call an overload tactic. When one piece has to defend so many pieces, there's always a problem that there's an overload tactic and he may go down. Garry is not. He looks. I mean, he looks.
What are we missing something on the chessboard now that Kasparov sees? He does not look. He looks disgusted. In fact, he looks just.
And he went on, and he should get an Oscar,
an award,
and he should get $300,000.
And whoa, look, Kasparov, after the move C4, has resigned.
Absolutely unheard of at that time. And in 19 moves, and he's like, nope, I'm done. I've been beaten. Had never happened before. But really, how many of us also enjoy all those times that we like to spend on the internet? And does this ever get old? Yeah, we do that. We're going to find that in a time capsule one day and say, did we really do that? And we're going to say, we did that. So we carry on through our timeline. This is about where we are today. I mean, Siri came to us in 2011. We have IBM Watson, also of that same time. And then Alexa, the virtual assistant system developed by Amazon. And we use her all the time. I wonder if anybody's phones just went off when I said that. Let's not go there. So think about the future now. This is what the World Economic Forum is predicting. They said in 2020 that AI would win the World Series of Poker. To my knowledge, that has not happened. But then look at these other predictions. I'd say that we are very close to some of these things happening. But really, truly, you know who would know about this more than anybody? It would be my friend, Stephen Ibaraki. Stephen is many things. If you have a chance to Google him, you'll think, wow, what an incredible guy. And he is. He was the founder, and he's also the global chair for the United Nations AI for Good. He's also the chairman of Reds Capital, which is an early stage venture capital firm that is based on empowering disruptive startups. So you kind of get an idea where his heart lies. He's been recognized by Microsoft as a most valuable person for 13 years in a row, since 2006. He's somebody that that really has dedicated his life to helping others and to giving back through education. He's a regular contributor to Forbes, and he's also a futurist. Stephen, come on up here on the stage. Let's spend a little time together. I'm gonna go ahead and stop share here. Hello, so nice to see you. So coming to us from beautiful Vancouver.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure being here. And I just loved your video. I thought it was great. So.
You know, it's funny, we've seen it a couple of times together and you just have to laugh at some of it. But did you ever really think, you know, I'm going to go first with a futurist lens, that we'd be here today at this moment in time? I mean, did you?
Yeah, actually I did. I mean, I built a computer when I was 10, so.
Yeah, tell me a little bit. Let me tug on that string. Let's go for that part there. Take us back to how this all began, into the parts of your early childhood and what really got you to thinking about these things.
So I guess I can think about sort of three key milestones in my professional and sort of my personal life. And there's the early inflection points, there's my teaching career, and then going and doing the AI for Good with the United Nations. So let's explore each one of those.
Let's do it.
But on the early inflection point, so let me give you a bit of a framework before I get into that. So one of the frameworks would be Angela Duckworth's work on grit, where she talks about perseverance and passion and optimism, stretch goals and hard work, and you combine that with talent, skills, you get achievement, and that's success. So that's one sort of framework. And another one is from Christensen, Dyer, and Gregerson. They wrote a piece at Harvard Business Review about innovators' DNA, and they identified 5 areas: questioning, observing, experimenting, associating, and networking. Okay, so think about that, innovators' DNA and grit. Okay, now, let's look at some of early inflection points. So, you know, I started reading pretty early, and I was reading encyclopedias, and I decided when I was 10, you know, let's do something that's kind of way out there. So I thought, I'm going to build a computer. So that speaks to things like grit, right? Perseverance and passion and commitment. And in the innovator's DNA, it speaks to questioning and observing and experimenting, right? And it worked. I mean, I didn't have a clue, but I just persisted and I built a system. In fact, it had a little bit of AI in it as well, a little bit of an expert system, by the way. So that's one part. And then in my early 20s, at an early inflection point, as I started writing, teaching, and speaking concurrently, all at the same time. And that's because I recognized when I was 21 that I had to get this association part of this innovator's DNA, and that is taking diverse areas and connecting them so they made sense, and then networking, building networks of trusted relationships. So it occurred to me that that's sort of key. And so that speaks to the innovator's DNA. So I started teaching, writing, and speaking on disruptive tech as a foundation. And just as a bit of a fact, over 90% of achieving goals is actually driven by trusted relationships. So, okay, so that's kind of the first early inflection part. The second part of my life was about teaching. Like, you know, I actually did a startup when I was in my teens, and had an exit in my early 20s. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to give back. I'm going to share some lessons. I went into teaching. So when I started teaching, a big part of that was explaining to all my students that experiences consist of the possible, the near impossible, and chaos. And chaos would be things like, you know, let's think about the sun and something bad happening from the sun. That's chaos. I can't go there, right? I can't manipulate it. So think about the near impossible. So, and then work on that near impossible. So I used to talk to my students about that. So prepare for those stretch goals, those boundary areas, because that's where the work is. And today, that's about skills and AI.
Yeah,
that's an
absolutely.
So let me give you something really tangible that happened this week that really illustrates this as well, that I did in my teaching. I interviewed Jack Dongarra, and he just won this Turing Award, which is the Nobel Prize in Computing Science. So I reached out to him this week and I said, let's do an interview, did it on Monday, and I wrote a Forbes article on him on Tuesday. So I recommend you have a look. He's got some great tips in that, great lessons. But he talks about bringing in students and giving them problems which they can't solve. And he says they always come back and says they can't be done. And he says, that's the point. That's why I gave it to you. You got to research and you got to find out how to do it. So that speaks to this framework of the near impossible. Okay, the second sort of inflection point in my life is, or the next inflection point, the third one I want to bring up is founding the UN ITU AI for Good. So I've been working on tech for good since the 1960s. I brought this concept to the UN for the Millennium Development Goals prior to its release in 2000. And they said, no, tech isn't any, let's ignore it. They did. So we missed yeah. So we missed the adoption of the internet and the Millennium Development Goals and mobile and AI and cloud because they didn't think it was important. However, I was able to bring this to the UN again when they released the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, and it was embraced. If you look at those goals, the 17 tech is everywhere in there, right?
It sure is. It sure is.
So this led to the AI for Good program with the UN, which is tech for good and its implications and that it has the future work and skills, right? Which is a big part of this conference here. But by the way, at the same time I brought tech for good to the UN, I also brought it to these 100 CEOs I was working with because they wanted me to look 10 years into the future. And this was in 2015. So, but what's important about them is they represented 92.7 trillion in investments and assets under management. So they invested in all the areas I brought to them, like the future of the workforce and financial inclusion and AI and quantum computing, big data, data privacy, cybersecurity, blockchain, and even things like precision and personalization of services.
Right.
And even bias and ethical frameworks. So, but getting back to the AI for Good and this thing from the UN, it's the only interdisciplinary AI summit bringing together governments, industry, academia, media, and all major 40 UN agencies. Now, for your audience, we have an open platform called the Innovation Factory where you and your students, if you've got an idea, you can apply.
Yeah.
It's
really cool. You guys should check it out. Yeah, absolutely.
And we have 8 focus groups working in AI solutions where anyone can apply to participate. So it's an open platform. We have daily programming in a new platform called the Neural Network, which is a hub for all activity and engagement. So you can think, hey, AI, how can you get involved? You can get involved with this program. So I'm giving you some examples in terms of inflection points in my life and areas where the college community can integrate.
Absolutely. I have to say, when it comes to the phrase that you used, trusted relationships, so much of the work that our community college partners have been able to do with one another and with the industry partners and other stakeholders they engage with is because of those long-term trusted relationships. And it's really nice to hear you bring that lens forward and showing how you've used it in your life and also how it impacts not just the work that we're doing in education, but how it has this pervasive impact along the speed of trust, how we get things done. I want to talk a little bit now about, a big topic. Usually when we hear AI, one of the very first things we hear then is, we have to be careful here, bias, discrimination. We go right there first, which is a very important thing to pay attention to. But how can AI also be a participation mechanism for one of the very themes of this conference, which is inclusion, equity, fairness?
That's a great question. So, by the way, I'm embedded in all of this on my daily work. So let me give you some. So let me give you some context. There's actually more than 300 frameworks and principles on AI ethics, which encompasses equity and fairness. And by the way, they're open platforms again. Anybody can get involved. And in November, UNESCO, which is this UN agency around education and culture and so on, completed their harmonized recommendations on the ethics of AI, which for the first time was endorsed by 193 member countries. And in December, their International Research Center in AI spotlighted the top 100 global applications in AI that addresses things like fairness and equity and so forth, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And in February, the top 10 were spotlighted, and 2 of which are in the Americas. One from NASA, and there's another one called Darwin AI in Canada, focused on explainable AI. So explainable AI is about ethical AI, right?
Right.
You also have regulations on AI in the EU. They've been released now in Canada and some US states, like in California and across the world. And then there's these two very large organizations, one called the ACM, which is #1 in computing science, and the IEEE, #1 in engineering. They have codes of ethics, and they're working on the ethical application of AI. And it's embedded everywhere, right? And from a hardware standpoint, like your iPhone has an A15 bionic chip that can do a mind-boggling 16 trillion operations per second. That's a mobile supercomputer based on AI. And in the context of the world population now, 70% of AI access to 7.8 billion people, and people are spending over 6 hours daily on their mobile with AI behind all of it. Think of your students. Are they spending that much time? So there's a platform for diversity, equity, and fairness, and it's being operationalized today. So it can be implemented. And all the programs I mentioned allow you to participate. And this is in particular is a focal point for the CEO Leadership Alliance. I call it the CLA. And their AI Center of Excellence and their Southern California Master Fund. Now, I've written a series of Forbes articles, including on the CLA on this. So if you're looking for resources or you want to get involved in these programs, just look at some of the articles of it.
I'll make sure that at the conclusion of the conference that we have those sent out to all of the conference attendees and participants in some way. We'll make sure that those are accessible. I want to go back to a point that you made about the pervasiveness of AI. I read recently a statistic that said that as of the fourth quarter of 2017, AI has penetrated nearly every aspect of our lives. That said, as we think of building an AI and AI-infused talent pipeline, Stephen, how are we going to remain competitive? Yes, globally, but as I think of our regions, also being competitive in our regional aspects.
Countries and for that matter, regions have to be embracing skills and reskilling in AI and talent growth. Yep. That's a must. If you don't do it, not good, right? And as you mentioned, the World Economic Forum earlier, well, they predicted over 80% adoption by 2025. And they talk about the need for skills for the future and what those skills are. And you can get this in the World Economic Future Jobs Report. So I recommend you have a look. But other reports of AI adoption pilots running at more than 70% with enterprises this year. So countries and counties like Orange County need to invest in education and funding deep tech. Now, the US government is doing this, and you're doing this in California. But you also have the CLA, the CEO Leadership Alliance, having their AI Center of Excellence, and their work with the Alliance for Southern California Innovation on talent growth in AI. And they also have their Southern California Master Fund, which is a fund of funds, investing in venture capital and investing directly in innovation in AI startups. So I say engage, because they're looking for engagement.
Yeah. And there are regions all across California that are doing similar efforts, that if you are part of those efforts, I encourage you to, find your way to Stephen or to myself or to my colleague Jasmine, because we're looking to build a network across the state of other folks who are doing this work, because there are many of you. And the community colleges have invested deeply in building the AI talent pipeline and in building innovation. So I have to applaud those efforts. So really, AI, it's an augmentation of our lives. It's a way to support and enhance our lives as well. Would that be a fair statement, Stephen?
Yeah, that's a really fair statement. So you're probably asking me, like, can I give an example or something like that? And, I'm going to give you one case study because I think it's really cool and you see it in the news, and that's the Metaverse. Yes. So the Metaverse is a prime example of AI augmenting and supporting our lives. And the Metaverse is a confluence of many technologies that are centered on something called digital replicas, called digital twins, that be totally immersive for all, where AI provides the foundation. So here are a few takeaways from some of the Metaverse global events where I'm involved. So I know all about them. The Metaverse technologies, all based on AI, include biomedical, new materials and nanotech, extended reality, the Internet of Things, edge computing, sensors and mobile, 5 and 6G, 3D graphics and printing, blockchain and tokens, and even really sort of futuristic things like exascale supercomputing in the cloud and space tech and quantum science and so on. So what will drive the engagements? Well, your students are spending more than 6 hours daily on their mobiles while you're teaching them.
Exactly.
And as I mentioned, more than 70% of the population globally are online. So we have a 3+ trillion metaverse-enabled economy. So how much do you compete with mobile when you're teaching, for example? So what is the metaverse? It's a series of interconnected 3D worlds driven by AI that can be navigated using links like the World Wide Web standards like Web, GL, and something called Pixar's Universal Scene Description Format, which enable you to interact using mobile devices or head-mounted displays, or even, would you believe now, they're coming out shortly, contact lenses and glasses. And by
I saw those. Yes, go ahead.
And by 2025, even direct brain interfaces. So that, and individual metaverse worlds are creating engaging experiences for brands and entertainers like Ariana Grande's concert tour in Fortnite. You pull your students, they probably were there. And how many of your students are using Epic Games in Fortnite or Roblox, where they can create their own games and avatars? And you know what? Virtual goods are generated 200 billion in gaming platforms. It's actually about 2 to 3 times bigger than movies. So metaverse systems will allow you to craft avatars that will suit your desires. So virtual reality creates opportunity to model and to study how identity, discrimination, and mental health interact. Or because I work with MIT on some of this stuff, MIT research is finding people who are more receptive to information presented by virtual characters they like. An insight that could lead the education community to create experiences so you can connect better with students. Now, if governed and used well, the metaverse will have its greatest impacts in the real world. And for example, education in the metaverse will more effectively impart skills and sensibilities to bring online. So let me give you an example is the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford. They're actually producing VR experiences that have enhanced environmental and social awareness. And they have a class with 175 people working together, building a city. Now, in your region, you have actually Anaheim Union High School District, one of the 12 in the US, is actually integrating metaverse into their curriculum. And they're exploring platforms like AltSpace from Microsoft, and they've asked me to do an introduction to Stanford and the work they're doing. Okay, so going beyond the Metaverse movie, Ready Player One, and if I were there live, I would say how many have watched it? But adopting designs pioneered in the Metaverse will drive positive impacts. And in the climactic scene of the movie, the hero tells how, I just came here to escape, but I found something much bigger than myself. So will many of the first denizens of metaverses, like the Translucia metaverse, which is founded in Global Good, and the ones that you're going to be creating with the CLA, for example.
I really appreciate the shout out to Anaheim Union High School District, because as we look at ecosystems across the region, this is a beautiful example of then the connection to Cypress College and their work. Henry Hua, if you're in the audience or if you're tuning in online, thank you. Thank you to Cypress. Thank you to Joanna Schilling, the president. Thank you to, the new chancellor for that North Orange County Community College District. But they are already thinking about a seamless talent pipeline, because we all know it leaks along the way, and we're trying to build models again across the state. They're not the only ones doing it, but I do appreciate, your shout out to that example. Well, Stephen, I think really as we kind of went down the road of the future, you showed us your role as a futurist. In closing, would you be so brave as to maybe talk about one scale up you could see in AI? Like, I'm going to be a futurist here and say, pay attention to this.
Again, I got to give a bit of context. So I know I'm going to go a little bit over my allotted time, so I think it'd be about 2 minutes, but In 2016, we had the fourth industrial revolution with AI at its foundation, and this became Society 5.0 and smart humanity. And the reason for that is because it's embedded everywhere, right? Government and industry and so on. And just to illustrate, I mentioned this Forbes article I wrote on Tuesday, and I employed an AI tool to write the article. Well, that AI can actually write screenplays and poetry. So, in that timeline, we can do
that web timeline. We're doing that today. Oh my gosh. Okay.
And I'm working on a human-like avatar from Being AI that can actually, you can talk to it or her actually. And I actually now demonstrate an avatar called Zebi in my keynotes. And if we had time, I could actually demonstrate. So we're immersed in something I call the fifth machine age. And I say it's ACCC. The A standing for universal automation and autonomous platforms and vehicles everywhere. The first C is about time compression and new innovations, where more changes in 10 years than the last 10,000 years. The convergence in the physical, the digital and biological existences and ubiquitous connectivity. But it's embedded everywhere, including in your clothing. In fact, I'm working with clothing manufacturers right now, wearables, mobile devices, and appliances, inescapable in its pervasiveness and its foundation. But all of this is based on talent growth in AI, and that's where you've got to pay attention to that talent growth. How do you manage it? And the educational community plays a critical role working with business and governments, and that's where you look at CLA, the CEO Leadership Alliance, as being a prime example with their AI Center of Excellence and their Southern California Master Fund. So I'm 2 minutes over, and my apologies.
That was I tugged on the string, so I'm gonna claim that one. I could spend all day with you, and I know every Friday our AI working group meets, so I will see you possibly tomorrow. I don't know if we're having that meeting still, Jasmine, but see you tomorrow, Stephen. You're welcome to stay. I'm gonna ask Brian from Intel to come up on stage, and let's dive into the work of the community colleges and this amazing partnership with Dell and Intel and AACC. First, Brian, please do introduce yourself, and then let's talk about the actual skills building, whether it's reskilling, upskilling, or just building awareness of AI. So please introduce yourself.
Well, Amy, first of all, thank you. Thank you, and thank you to everybody in the audience. And what a thrill and a little challenging to follow Stephen. Boy, what a great energy, great presentation. I mean, he covered it all. So there's a few things the rest of us can cover, but he really did a great job. My name is Brian Gonzalez, and I'm the Executive Director of our Intel Digital Readiness Programs globally. So I lead a worldwide team that's really focused on this whole area of how do we engage in building capability and capacity around the world in these new emerging technologies. And my team has a particular focus around artificial intelligence. So for me, it's really a thrill to be here.
I'm glad that you're here, and I'm going to make the connection to our community college partners. Of course, Douglas, you're there on the stage. I want to give a shout out to Madeline Grant and her team at Santa Ana College. They were one of the original 17 that were chosen to part of the Intel's AI for Workforce. So between the AACC and the partnership with Intel and Dell and the work Douglas is a part of, and then also the work of Intel's AI for Workforce, it's happening. It's happening here at our community colleges. I'd like to talk a little bit before we look at a couple of your slides, Brian, about the Intel's AI for Workforce, particularly how this is going to prepare across levels the AI-infused talent pipeline. Because often, at least for myself, when I hear AI, I think, oh, coding. You have to do coding and coding and coding. But you don't really understand that there's this general awareness that we all have to understand the skills and the needs for the talent pipeline. So tell us about those skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the very start of our program, we realized that we wanted to reach a broad audience. We also knew that many folks that need to know this may have a non-technical background. So we have to look at solutions that are no code, low code, and I can go into that a little bit. But what was vital for us is to engage and collaborate with community colleges, because we knew that community colleges play a vital role in terms of bringing forward new skills and developing students for the current and future workforce. So when we looked at our program, we first of all, we took the very best of what we see as project-based learning and really brought in content that could be customized by the faculty and the students to really hit the things that were of most interest to them. When we looked also at how we would apply it, we wanted to have a learning journey that would bring awareness to what the technologies are, build a foundation, and go into an experience that they could actually not just learn about the technology, but apply that to a project. And a lot of what they learn is, first of all, essential and basic things that we all need to do is critical thinking. How do we write a problem statement around the use of the technology, bringing in AI frameworks. So we start to introduce what are these concepts, what are the tools that are available, open source tools that are available, what are the skills that are being required, and how do we do it in a way that takes advantage of what the students bring to the class, but also the new skills that they need to develop. So in part of the work that we do, it has a portion that it's no code or low code, and it leads to coding if that's one option that they want to pursue, where you get into Python and you really start to deconstruct those algorithms to really understand what the AI value is and how these projects can be brought to fruition with AI technologies.
I really appreciate too how you've broken it down into 3 levels of understanding the different badges that you issue. I'm a recipient of your the first learner badge, I should say, of Intel's AI for Workforce, as someone who would be the no code and low code portion of that spectrum. I found the curriculum to be understandable and something that I could demonstrate mastery of my knowledge towards. Again, low code, no code, but it got me thinking along the lines of upskilling and reskilling, because we're all going to have to understand this. To that point, I want to give a shout out to our K-12 partners at Coastline ROP. This summer, they are going to pilot the first K-12 version of AI for Workforce. Thank you, Brian, for having, and Christina and Carlos for having the faith and confidence in CLA and our education partners to do this, because the intent is to do the low code, no code part,
right,
with the intentionality of having those students hand it off directly to Santa Ana College's Intel AI for Workforce for the full-blown semester-based course. That's the vision, and it's just great to be able to do that together. As we get ready to go over to our on-stage portion, I just wanted to show these couple of slides here because I think it really illustrates a lot of the topics that we've just traversed together. So AI-fueled world. AI is considered the new electricity. I don't know if you coined that term at Intel, but I think there's great truth in it because of the pervasiveness of AI. Look at these industry sectors. That represents the work we do at the community colleges. Touch on those just a little bit for us.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Shaky is everywhere now, right? Your great video on Shaky and how that evolved, and it really is everywhere. And it's not only everywhere, but it is for everyone. That's why we have to really be consistent in the way that we create an open approach for many to engage in this opportunity with AI. Because it does affect every industry that touches us in some way could benefit by this augmented superpower, if we want to use that terminology, in terms of what AI can do and how AI may be able to do it better, right? So we really have to understand what we're trying to accomplish and then see where the technology can play that role to really give us that enhanced capability. But it's you use the example. I won't mention the name with the A because my alarms will go off. But it is in everything and pervasive in everything that we do. But it's also an opportunity for us to engage with our students so they can partake in this in a way that they are creators and developers, not just consumers of AI. And with that comes new opportunities in the types of jobs that are out there. It's not all coding and programming, although understanding the value of a good code or a good algorithm will be important. But it's also a fusion of skills. It's skills that relate more to translation for the machine to understand, right? When we talk about machine learning, we really need to help it and train it in what it's learning. So there's a lot of capabilities, of course, that we bring as humans that is going to make it possible for us to develop these next generations of shakies that are going to, do something wonderful and help us tackle some really big challenges. So the area of training, explaining, sustaining, those are areas that in our courses, we talk about that, we engage, we give examples, and we really bring to the forefront so the students can apply this to their projects, which in themselves are sustainable and relevant to them.
Right. Two very important intersects for our students so that we retain them and they are able to continue. Brian, please stay on stage. I'm going to toss things down to my colleague, Jasmine Pachnanda, down on stage. She's our Senior Vice President for our Artificial Intelligence Initiative. She's a good friend. She's delightful to work with. I'm very grateful for you. And our other guests that are going to now plug in the rest of the journey. Stephen's going to maybe pop back on, Jasmine, here and there. So be aware of that. And I'm going to take off. So thank you, everybody, for this time. And Jasmine, it is all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Brian. So we'll take it here live now and stop looking at a screen. If I could, I would have had a Roomba come across because I think that was the part that everyone's going to remember the most from today's session. But we want to bring it now to more of a micro level and a local level. So I have two guests here and I'll ask them to introduce themselves and share a little bit about AI and their world, both from an educator perspective, but also from the employer perspective. So Doug, we'll go ahead and start with you. If you could share a little bit more about you, your role, and how you really are embedding fundamentals of AI into your advanced transportation programming.
Thank you. I'm Douglas Redmond. I'm an automotive instructor at College of the Desert. Pleasure to be here. I want to say thank you to everyone because I feel your pain. We're all educators. You guys, we all go through a lot of struggles, but I think we're doing a great job, so thank you. So the AI for automotive would fall in the non-coding realm. And as I looked at our program and what we were doing, as many of you do, I'm not going to be saying things that are new to many of you, but I'll look out 5 years or so and what's on the horizon. And it's clear that AI, VR, in our case, autonomous vehicles, advanced driver assist systems, those are all there. And I don't always see how they're going to integrate at that point, but I know they're there and I know I need to deal with them. So I think I start the process by looking at the horizon, seeing what's there, getting a buy-in of my team, and trying to get a team that can deal with what's coming over the horizon, just from a global kind of large view perspective. That's where I start.
Great, thank you so much. And Jerry, I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and a little bit about your role at Dataiku.
Yeah, sure. So thank you guys for being here. I have a 10-year-old and he will soon be entering college. Well, not so soon, I guess, but at some point he'll be entering college, and I appreciate the work that our system really does to enable our kids to be able to be productive out there. So thank you very much for doing that. So my name is Jerry Hartanto. I work at a company called Dataiku. I'm what they call an AI strategist and evangelist. My role is, well, let me tell you a little bit about Dataiku first. It's a platform to help others create machine learning and AI products. And that cuts across multiple industries, whether it's financial services or healthcare or retail. And it also cuts across multiple business functions. So it could be marketing and sales, it could be accounting and finance, it could be supply chain, et cetera. So that's kind of the purpose of the company. Did you want me to tell? Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what I do, at least. So from the function of being a strategist and evangelist, it's actually twofold. The first thing is to help organizations understand or paint a picture of the vision for what AI can do for them, and that means really understanding the value that it can provide, as well as the different use cases that they can implement in their organizations to effectively get that value. So that's kind of the first part of it. The second part is around implementation. So being able to connect AI to the business strategy or the business initiatives, right? That's the purpose. AI itself is a technology, but the purpose for these organizations to exist is to achieve a business outcome and to improve their business metrics. So we want to make sure that the AI initiatives are tied to that specific thing. We also want to make sure that they have an understanding of the capabilities that are required in order to be able to deliver on those business outcomes. When you start with data and how to turn that data into something useful so that managers can make business decisions and be able to act on that. And then the third element of it is to enable them to scale, right? So a lot of organizations may have started an AI program, and it could be pretty small, which is great because they're experimenting and understanding how to use it. But eventually, in order to be able to get massive benefits out of it, you need to be able to scale that in some shape or fashion. So we help with that as well.
Great. Thank you both so much. So Doug, back to your role a little bit more. What has been working as you've been integrating AI? What works for your students? What are you seeing that really is showing that students are able to uptake into these skills to prepare them for jobs of the future?
I'm new at this, and it's experimental for me at this point. So it's kind of trying to determine what is going to work. But I remember there was a representative from Tesla, their educational representative, who came by, and we met a few times. And I can't exactly remember his name, but I remember this one meeting. We were talking about what's relevant, and that's what I really have to key in on as we're looking at the horizon. And he said, I need a workforce that understands mechatronics. This was years ago, mind you. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't even spell mechatronics. I don't even know what that word means, but he wants it. And does he understand we're automotive people and we do mechanics and cars, but not mechatronics? And it was frustrating and challenging at the same time. It was really a reflection point for me saying, okay, I know these things are relevant. I know they're coming down the pike. I see what industry's asking. Now the big challenge is, how do I make it happen? And we've come up with some specific things I could share.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Again, this is a learning process, but what I put together was a certificate in autonomous vehicles because it's going to revolve around autonomous vehicles, and there's current systems in place and current training we can do that are not dealing with the autonomous vehicle because it's here but it's not here, but with parts of the autonomous vehicle that are going to be there. And it was frustrating. How do I get to what industry wants? And I kept dealing with that, and I kept looking for relevant ways to get that across to my learners. So here's what I came up with. One of the classes in that certificate is Automotive Mechatronics. And oddly enough, there's actually books on that now, and that's helpful. But what I focused in on were some things that I worked through and was frustrated with and learned along the way. One of them is Lego Mindstorms. Many of you may have used those. They're a very simple form. And the other piece was the Intel AI. Now, they offer some amazing curriculum modules that we can integrate. My focus is going to be on the non-coding one, the ethics, the how do you spell AI, the what is it, it's critical for our CTE population, which is huge, that they have an understanding and they have a connection with AI. And when he said mechatronics, I'm thinking, all my learners, how do I get them to that point? I know they need to be there. But some of these tools, and the ones I chose was the Mindstorm, and then, of course, the partnership with Intel on some of their non-coding modules. And the point of this course, for you automotive people, will make sense, but is to help our learners understand that the heart of the car is no longer the internal combustion engine, but it's the electronics. And what really is going on is we have electrical devices being controlled, mainly by computers that are making all the magic happen. And that certainly leads into the autonomous vehicles. So that's a specific course that I'm running through curriculum. I've got the pieces, but there are a lot of scary parts. I mean, I'm no AI expert. So, we've located some funding. We've got some of the pieces, and there's an adjunct who I'm working with to help make this happen. I'll let you know how it turns out, but this is where we're heading now.
You guys all can email him in 6 months from now, see how it's going. Thanks so much, Doug. And Brian, I'll just shoot it back over to you for a moment, because Doug did mention Intel and this connection, right? Where he had a conversation with Tesla to start to drive what his curriculum looks like in creating these certificates. So just any thoughts that you've had, or as you've seen the Intel curriculum being implemented across the state at various community colleges, what conversations have you all been having on the industry side and how this connects to the skills that they are looking for?
Yeah. So one thing I want to comment on something Doug said, because I think he's a great example of it, right? He may not see himself as an expert in AI, but he is a committed leader to seeing how these new technologies can help what he does know very well, right? So it's the application of the technology that is key. So when we have successful efforts, like the one hopefully with Doug's team, we have 39 modules, the modules that make sense. We have over 200 hours of content, the hours that make sense to them. But what it requires is that commitment from the leaders. And where we see these programs do well is where that is there. It's not that the expertise is there, but that the outcomes are understood. And also collaboration with industry. I mean, we're very fortunate that Intel is mentioned. There are other great companies doing amazing things in this space, and we're just part of that ecosystem. And finally, and this is a great example of this session today, is creating that community of learning to really share and to bring in the expertise. But as I said before, it's really, AI is really making sense of data. What data do we want to tackle? And then what technology can play is also going to be a secondary role once have a sense of where you want to go with it.
Great, thanks. And so Jerry, back to you now. As we look to democratizing access to AI skills, and we've talked about this a little bit already in the conversation about there's opportunities for low code or no code skills related to AI. And as it gets more complex, obviously skills can be developed towards that complexity. How do you as Data IQ, as a platform provider, kind of view this scaffolding of skills? How do you kind of pitch it to your clients of this is an easy way to implement AI within your company?
Yeah, at Data IQ, we have a saying, which is everyday AI with extraordinary people. And that's the concept that AI can be done by anyone. And it's also the concept that it's applicable in kind of their daily working environment. We also have a belief that going forward, we think the majority of the value that's being driven by AI is not going to be from data scientists, but actually be from people in the businesses themselves, the lines of businesses. Now, why could this happen? If you think about the workflow, if you will, or the process to generate kind of AI or machine learning models, it starts with what we talked about initially and what Brian just mentioned, which is understanding the business and what the business is trying to do. It then starts with taking the data and morphing it or changing it into something that can be usable by what's called an algorithm. And then from there, it comes into creating the model itself. And then from there, it becomes part of implementation, which means putting it into an operational workflow or operational systems so that it can be consumed by people on the front line who are making the decisions with them. So if you think about that, where the data scientist normally fits in is in the development of the model. Everything else can be done by a non-data scientist. So we can think about upskilling all the people that are out there in the lines of businesses to be able to do that type of work, which is all complementary to the data scientist work. Now, as we kind of use the technology, we are starting to be able to develop machine learning models in an automated fashion so that again, even someone like my 10-year-old could press a button, feed the data in, and then a model is just outputted. And now what he's got to do, though, is he's got to make sure that that model is performing well, and to the earlier points, be able to interpret what that model is telling him so that he can make that business decision. So that's kind of the way that at Dataiku, we're trying to use that. If you wanted to take a concrete example, let's say that you are trying to enroll students into your schools. And in the process of doing that, you're going to be sending them out lots of messages, marketing campaigns, et cetera. You're going to be able to see, using a dashboard of some sort, whether or not these students are actually, or the people that you're trying to target are actually taking you up on your offer, and are they going through the enrollment process so that they finally enroll in the school, and then eventually they're going to graduate, which also means that you're going to be monitoring their progress throughout the school. Now, what you can do, though, is you can also use the machine. So you're doing this, let's say, right? The lines of businesses are doing this kind of work to be able to look at what's going on. But you can also now take that information and create a machine learning model to be able to potentially predict which types of individuals are the ones that you want to target, and what type of messaging would be best sent to them so that they can be more receptive. And even the ones that are likely to drop out of the enrollment process, and what are you going to do in order to be able to bring them back? Now, that can be done by a data scientist, but it can also be done by an individual. So going back to this code and no code, all of that stuff is capable with a product like Dataiku.
Great, and I love this looking forward of what can AI do for all of us here in this room, right? I think we'll get back to that in 1 second. Just one additional question for you though, Jerry, is when you look at the clients that you serve and work with, what are some of the skills or characteristics of those businesses of those that are successful in being able to implement? Because I think that's a good reflection for all of us of all the types of skills that we want to be building in our students, right? Because they're going to be part of these teams eventually in helping implement AI.
Yeah, so number one is the willingness to try, right? You can't really do it unless you're willing to do some type of experimentation. So being able to carve out a specific small project and trying it with a small data set and seeing what happens. That's kind of the first thing. A lot of organizations are just not willing to do that because of some type of fear, as an example. Secondly, is the ability to translate the business problem or the problem that you have into an AI or a machine learning problem. That's critical because you could build a really good model and it could perform really well, but it may not answer the business question that you're trying to answer, in which case, okay, it was cool, but it didn't really help. And then, a lot of people want to continue to improve the model and the performance of the model, but you have to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? So again, you want to make sure that whatever improvement you get out of the model improves your business metrics just as much. And then the third part of it is, believe it or not, change management. So we often talk about AI as being a technology, but that technology has to be consumed by real people on the front lines who are going to make a decision and then act on that. So somehow that technology needs to be consumable and it needs to be done in a way that it's in their interest. So we call that kind of augmented decision-making, if you will.
Great, thanks. And so Doug, back to you for a moment. You shared with us some of the successes, right, that have been working, and you're in the middle of it. So again, we'll check back with you in a year and see how the certificate's going. But what are some of the barriers that maybe you've come across in trying to implement skill building around AI?
I think that the biggest barrier was relevance. So I understood it was on the horizon, it needed to be done. We need to make sure our learners are up to speed and relevant with what the industry wants, but I didn't always have the tools to do that. I had to do a lot of thinking to come up with, okay, I'm going to use this tool, Mindstorms. And then I was introduced to another tool, which was Intel's AI program. And there's probably dozens of other tools that you may want to integrate into your program, but it's finding the right fit of those puzzle pieces coming together to give you the picture that you need. And that was a struggle. There were some funding issues, though funding tends to be pretty good right now. And then sometimes it is hard to explain to people that have to approve funding what you're doing. There's that too. And training. I mean, okay, I've got this vision for where I think the program needs to go based on some good input, but how do I bring my instructors up to speed to where they're at the point that they can, facilitate this learning? So those are just some of them. One thing that comes to mind is I put together a couple thoughts on the process. It's seeing the vision, or my process. It was seeing the vision and then starting the journey, not really knowing what those pieces would be, literally, and then struggling to make it relevant, right? Which we all do, and we understand how we have to do. And then getting in the game, start something. Now, I guarantee you some of the things I do will fail. I hope some will succeed, but you got to get in the game and see what works and what doesn't. And then, the part I know that's going to happen that's critical is revising it and cutting those things that are losses, but maximizing those gains. So.
Great. Yeah, we got to start somewhere to keep trying. So, and Brian, I'll pitch that same question to you, which is, what are some of the barriers that you've seen, especially as Intel is trying to kind of create a skill development approach at a scalable level? So, what are some of the barriers that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back though, but even before I answer that, one thing that Jerry said was this whole idea of demystifying AI. And I think that's really, really important, and really focus on the problem and the technology that supports that. I think that's a key point. One of the things that has been mentioned before is this whole idea of democratizing AI. And I think a challenge that we see is that, although there's a saying, right, that talent is equally distributed, but not opportunity. So there are areas, for example, we talked a lot about no code and low code type scenarios, but there are areas, for example, where coding is key and where some students want to pursue that. And at Intel, we see where we can help in terms of, let's say, algebra and some advanced maths in high schools. We're working with Khan Academy and others to try to reach out, especially in some cases where these are schools of that are under-resourced in one way or another. How can we bring that capability or that access so the students can not have a lack of algebra understanding if that's where they want to pursue more on the coding side, that's going to be a detriment to them? How can we bring that in earlier and augment what's going on in their high schools and in their learning journey towards a career in AI that's more on the computational side?
Great. Thank you. Great point. Great point. So as we look ahead to see opportunities for AI in the future, Jerry already brought up one great example that we're all facing here with declining community college enrollment and opportunities to use AI. Do you all see AI as a threat? Do you see it as an opportunity? What other opportunities do you see for all of us here in the room in leveraging AI, whether it's in the classroom or for more existential, organizational wide type issues? Doug, I'll start with you.
Thank you. As I thought about that, I thought, well, it's neither, it's a necessity. I've got to deal with AI. But with that mindset, I say it's an opportunity, as I realize I have to. I'm an optimist anyway, but I think it is an opportunity. And this is another struggle we dealt with and we still deal with. And it's the idea that AI is going to replace me, replace my job. It's going to cost jobs. And, I would argue and try to share that, well, AI does a really good job of doing the parts of my job I hate to do. And it does a better job at those. And it allows me to spend my limited time on the things I really love to do. I do well, and I do better than AI. I remember listening to a podcast where they talked about AI for medical purposes and how it could look at, tens of thousands of different tests for this one item. But it wasn't necessarily an issue of, okay, AI, tell me the diagnosis, look at tens of thousands upon thousands of of cases. It was a really, what I loved about it, they said, okay, AI is going to bring you the top 3 diagnosis, but then they need a real doctor to look at that real person and come up with the best diagnosis. It's an integration is what it's going to come down to. But then again, AI, take the stuff I hate doing and do it, please, so I could do other stuff. So that's kind of how I see it.
Absolutely. In one of the previous organizations I worked for, we used to have a saying, what we hate, we automate, because exactly, we don't, let's get someone else or something else to do those tasks that we don't want to do. Brian, any thoughts on that? What is the opportunity for?
Yeah, I think it's a thrilling opportunity. If I can channel a little bit of Stephen and all the wonderful things he said, I think it's absolutely a thrilling opportunity. When I see the projects that these students are doing, one of them that comes to mind, one that I saw recently, where a student had developed an algorithm to help in the early detection of seizures for epilepsy, because that was something that was a concern in their family. So they're able to use a set of technologies to apply something that they really care in solving, and AI brings that augmented capability. So I think it's a absolutely fascinating ride that we have to do, and take the journey, be smart about how we take the journey, but go tackle those difficult things and bring every tool we have, and AI is another one.
And Jerry, obviously share more about your thoughts here, but also if you could expand upon, you probably see this when you mention change management, right? People are worried that AI is going to take over their job, and maybe that leads to some hesitancy and acceptance. So share a little bit more about any experiences you might have seen there, or anything else around the opportunity for AI.
Sure. I echo all of those sentiments in terms of automation. We have an idea of, you want to automate the mundane stuff so that you can take your shot at the moonshot. And I think that's kind of what AI allows you to do, right? Is to get rid of all those things that we hate to do. But then we have some huge, big ideas that we want to go tackle. This is kind of, I guess, maybe the Star Trek kind of thinking, right? Where we don't have to worry about money and all that stuff, but we're going after that big idea, and we can use that intelligence to help us do that. There are a couple of other areas that I think we have to, again, I don't know if it's an opportunity or a threat, but one is what Stephen mentioned, which is fairness, bias, and interpretability, right? So we need to have a good understanding of why AI is making the decisions that it's making. And also we have to be clear that when we have created a model and we put it out there for others to use, that it's not making unfair biases, because AI it's not good or bad. It's just going to learn from the data. So we have to be very careful about how we use the data and curate the data in order to be able to help kind of make some of those good decisions. The other thing about AI, I think, is it needs to be consumable in a way that it's easy for a lot of us to use, right? So maybe augmentation with AR or VR, to be able to take that information and apply it more easily. In the world today, being able to take that information and put into a chart or a graph, so that, as Brian mentioned, it's an augmented kind of decision that a human can then take a look at it and be able to say, this is the one that I think is appropriate. Now, with respect to the question around change management, absolutely. I think to what Doug was saying, people fear that AI will take over their jobs. And we want to kind of, first of all, not pitch it that way. We want to be able to pitch it in a way that it's saying it's augmenting or helping, kind of filter out the things that are maybe not relevant, or the things that don't make sense, so that they can spend more time on identifying or researching the things that are more relevant. There are multiple methods to be able to do that. So one way, for example, might be to have good communications going around the organization to explain kind of what's happening. Another way might be to align incentives so that people have a reason to be using the machine learning models, as opposed to continuing to rely on their gut. And another way might be to have a role model, and someone who really understands or is incented to use the machine learning model. And so other people will kind of follow in those steps in order to be able to do something similar. But yes, all of those things are kind of necessary in order to get machine learning implemented, because if it's not implemented, you'll get no value out of it.
All right. As we wrap up here, any closing thoughts or anything that one of you all didn't have a chance to share? Take your opportunity now.
I'll say, in an additional point, we're also dealing with virtual reality and working with some companies that work through training in automotive through the Oculus glasses, and of course, they can be used in all kinds of fields. And there's fascinating links, even though it's very ambiguous how you define AI, and virtual reality could be in that world. It certainly is. But then there's also the AI tutor within the virtual reality that can help our learners in the augmented learning. I would just encourage you to start the journey. Keep looking. Don't give up till you find the puzzle pieces that fit for your program. Get in the game. Give it a shot. You're gonna have some failures and some successes, and keep doing what you guys do all the time, which is help make things relevant for our learners. Thank you.
Brian, any closing thoughts?
No, just a big thank you to everybody in attendance for their attention and all their efforts to move this forward. Thank you very much.
Jerry?
Yeah, echo all of those, and just leave you with one thought. So McKinsey put out an article a couple years ago, and they said, and I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like there's a gap in terms of data science talent of something around 10,000 people, or something, either 10,000 or 100,000. However, they also said that the gap for people to be able to understand the data and use the data was 10 times that. So going back to kind of the democratization and the low code kind of things, it's not necessarily about the technology itself. It's about understanding that data and figuring out what to do with it.
Fantastic. I don't think I could close it out any better than that, because AI is relevant to all of our students, regardless of what they might want to go into, because ultimately data is driving all of our companies, all of our businesses, all of our organizations now, and is just going to continue in the future. So thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, we highly recommend reaching out to Brian at Intel. They definitely have some great curriculum, as well as Doug, hear more about what they're doing, and Jerry, of course, representing the industry side. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Job Speaker is bridging the gap between education and employment for the skills-based economy. Working with community colleges across California, Job Speaker helps educators align educational resources with student-desired career choices and deploy a career-oriented infrastructure to achieve that goal. Job Speaker efficiently guides all students into and along their chosen pathway to ensure learning that prepares them for the world of work. Learn more at jobspeaker.com. Certiport, industry-recognized certifications for college and career readiness. Certiport is the leading provider of learning curriculum, practice tests, and performance-based IT certification exams that accelerate academic and career opportunities for learners. Certiport is dedicated to helping people succeed through industry-recognized certification. Our credentials are aimed at enhancing individual productivity, marketability, and value. Learn more at certiport.com.